Love is gentle as a rose, and love can conquer anyone.
I want to talk this morning about the big idea, what in the world, why Jesus showed up, what he was trying to do, and I don't want to summarize it too much, but we have to understand it's not complicated. It's not complicated, but as I've said a million times, and you'll get tired of me saying it, but I'm going to continue to say it, it's not easy. Like digging a ditch, right? It's not complicated, but it's not easy. I want a ditch. It's not rocket science. Put the shovel in, get the dirt out. Those of you from my generation are thinking of Cool Hand Luke right now. And that's the idea. It's not complicated, but the work is not easy. So I want to walk through this morning, and this is the second week of our Believing and Learning to Believe in Your Own Life Again series, and it's important that we all understand that you can have the life that you've, and let me say it like this, a life that you've never even dared to dream about. It's funny, have you seen these commercials for, during the football games, they've got these commercials now for the fantasy leagues where you can win money. And I was watching Jared Goff play football yesterday for Cal. What fun that is. And they kept playing these commercials. And one of the lines in one of the commercials as the guy was getting the big check is, dare to dream big enough to get one of these big checks. And I was thinking, that's it? That's as big as you want me to dream? Come on. That seems like settling for me. I mean, nothing wrong with money, and sure, I'd love to have more of it. But that's not, like in my heart of hearts, my biggest dream is not to take one of those checks home. Now, I don't know what your biggest dream is, and I'm not talking about what you do for a living. I'm not talking about, when I was a kid, I really wanted to do, not even that. What I'm talking about is who you are, who you want to be, not what you want to do, right? And there's a goofy old way of saying it, we're human beings, not human doings. But we live like human doings. And my suggestion is that Jesus showed up to say, wait a second, you're selling your life short. Jesus showed up to unpack life the way God intended life to be. He says it in John 10. And I've got a lot of scripture to read today. And I've typed a lot of the references in on your notes, but I didn't type the verses themselves in just for lack of room, but you can look these up later. John 10:10 is just a huge idea. So when Jesus shows up, what does he show up for? Well, John 10:10 says this. This is John's way of recording the words of Christ. He said, "The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full." Another translation says, in abundance. Now, some have understood that to mean that I should be enjoying wealth and luxury. That's what abundance means to them. But that's not exactly what Jesus meant. In fact, there's a way to live in abundance without ever experiencing wealth or luxury. The idea is that the beauty of God is so full in me that it begins to overflow. Jesus said it like this in John chapter 2 to a woman who was trying to get water from a well. If you drink the water that I will give you, it will be like an artesian well springing up out of you, and it will never run dry. And anyone who is around you will feel wetted from that water. It's amazing. That's life as God intended it. Now, I don't know a lot of people who live that way. But Jesus did. Now, if you just read Matthew, or read Mark, or read Luke, or read John, you'll read the story of a man who lived in such a way that you couldn't wait to hang out with him. He was I don't want to say attractive because we think of that as physically attractive. We don't know what he looked like, but he was attractive. He was magnetic. Because when you were around him, he was who he was, which allowed you to be more of who you wanted to be, without the ego attachments, without the, oh, how do I need to show up and impress this guy? And it didn't matter what you had done or what you were in the midst of doing, there was like no judgments coming out of this person. So Jesus showed up to give us an idea of what life is supposed to be. Number two, and this is just kind of one builds on another just this morning to give us kind of a jumping off point. The life that God intends, this life of abundance, fullness, is built on metanoia. Now, a foreign word for most of us, but we talked about it a few weeks ago. It's the word translated repentance. But repent has kind of a awkward and negative connotation in our minds because of how it's been used. The idea is just to change the way you think. You cannot have this life if you continue to think about life the way we've been thinking about life. It only makes sense. Jesus said it like this, Luke chapter 13. Unless you change the way you think about life. In fact, that's actually not the one I wanted to use. The one I wanted to use is in John, right? David, go to the next slide, would you? Matthew 4. From that time, Jesus began to preach, saying, change the way you think about life, for the kingdom of heaven is... where? What? Within me. And Jesus said, in fact, no one will find it by saying, here it is or there it is, for the kingdom of heaven is, some translations say at hand, some translations will say among you. The idea, and kind of the most accurate idea of this a translation is it's within you. You will find what you're looking for when you look inside. You have to change the way you think about everything. Change the way you think about everything. Well, what do you mean? Well, story after story after story. We could talk about this one idea all day, and I did a few weeks ago, but just think about this rich young guy that shows up to Jesus, and he's very devout Hebrew, and he shows up to Jesus as a rabbinical teacher and says, good teacher, what must I do to have the life of the ages, this life that you seem to be talking about? And Jesus looks at him and says, well, it's simple. Just keep all the commandments. And he says, I've kept them all since I was a kid. And Jesus goes, oh, wow. That's pretty good. One thing you're lacking, go sell everything you own, give it to the poor. And then come and follow me. And it says, the writer says, he went away sorrowful because he had a lot of stuff. Now, that's what it says. Does that mean everybody has to sell everything? No. But this guy had to change the way he was thinking about his things, because the way he was thinking about his things got in the way of following God through Christ. See, you have to change the way you think about everything. And then, let me just give you this by way of introduction. Metanoia requires a new way of seeing. See, how do I know what parts of my thinking I have to change? This is called self-awareness. This is not easy. How easy to be self-aware? What does it normally require? What does self-awareness normally require, at least from your experience, those of you who have gotten a bit of it? Okay, stopping and listening. Yeah. What makes you realize that you don't have it? I'll tell you what it is for me. Pain. Pain. When someone goes, dude, what are you doing? And you think, well, what do you mean, what am I doing? When I realize that I don't know myself very well. I have really no self-awareness. I don't realize how I'm hurting people or how my thinking is off because I have nothing to compare it to. I certainly don't think, as Kevin just said, what I should do is stop and kind of listen during my day because I've got a lot to do. And so normally, for most humans, it is a painful exchange that helps us understand, wait a second, maybe I'm not who I thought I was. Now, this has happened to me 1 billion times. Usually, lots of little ones. Now, every once in a while, there's like an atomic bomb-sized one in my life that goes off. And just the time I think, okay, good, I finally understand who I really am and what's really going on, then God drops another one on me, and I go, wow, there's more. There's more to this. There's more to this. Metanoia requires a new way of thinking. If it didn't require a new way of thinking, then your old way of thinking would be just fine. See, this is it. No one thinks they need a new way of thinking about things if the one they have seems fine to them, right? It's like, I don't need a new car. This one's just fine. But when your car explodes in flames on the 101, then you go, okay, I need a new car. So for a lot of us, our car has to explode in flames along the 101 for us to go, I need a new car or a new way of thinking. This is no longer working. And so what I'm saying is, when my current way of thinking creates pain for me and those whom I say I love, that's when I begin to see. Now, I have to say that there is no paradigm, no example of this better that I know of in the Bible anyway. Now there's a lot of them. There's a lot of them. And when you begin to think like this, you see them everywhere. And so immediately my mind goes, okay, let's tell a few. But then my true self goes, no, we can't do that. We got to keep moving. Keep moving. Stay focused. Lucky for you, my Adderall is kicked in. How about those Bears? Man. And poor field goal kicker. Peter's journey. Let's just look at Peter's journey for a few minutes. Peter, Apostle Peter in the Newer Testament. Peter's journey with God is a remarkable gift, and it might just be for people like me, I don't know, but Peter's journey is a remarkable gift because it's not only Peter's journey, but I find myself in it as well. And what I want to do over the next few minutes is just bullet point some pieces of Peter's life that I think are not only just really part of Peter's life, but an explanation of my story. Does that make sense? So I want to use Peter as an example, and I love this guy, but Peter begins his life with God in John chapter 1. I'm going to read these passages for you. Listen to this. The next day, John was there again with two of his disciples. When he saw Jesus passing by, he said, "Look, it's the Lamb of God." When the two disciples heard him say this, they followed Jesus. Turning around, Jesus saw them following and asked, "What do you want?" He said, "Rabbi," which means teacher, "where are you staying?" "Come," he replied, "and you'll see." So they went and saw where he was staying and spent the day with him. It was about the 10th hour. Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, was one of the two who heard what John said and who had followed Jesus. The first thing Andrew did was to find his brother Simon, that's who we're talking about, Simon Peter, and tell him, "We have found the Messiah." And he brought him to Jesus. Jesus looked at him and said, "You are Simon, son of John. You will be called Cephas," which when translated is Peter. Peter had a curiosity. Who is this guy? And I love the way John writes about this when Simon Peter's brother began to kind of have a curiosity about the rabbi, what Jesus said is this: come and see. Come and check it out. You're curious? Beautiful. Come and see. That's how we begin. There's a curious encounter. And then I find that true in my life. I've gotten very curious about God and about how can I change and grow and about what's really going on and just about the way life works. And so then Peter is kind of with Jesus for a while, and Jesus does another kind of interesting thing, and there's another point in this where after this curious encounter where we begin this life with God, and that's all we have to be to begin. And if you haven't really begun yet, you've begun, right? If you haven't begun yet and you're sitting here, I have some bad news for you. You've begun. Well, I'm just checking things out. Of course you are. In fact, that's what Jesus says, right? Do what? Come and check it out. Come and see. See what this life is like. See who I really am. See what could be possible for you. Come and see. But there's a point in time when Jesus kind of assesses Peter, and in chapter 5 of the book of Luke, he says this: one day, as Jesus is standing by the lake of Gennesaret with people crowding around him and listening to the word, he saw at the water's edge 2 boats left there by fishermen who were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to put out a little from shore. Then he sat down and taught the people from the boat. Okay? Acoustically correct. If you're on a boat in the water, your voice carries. Has that ever happened to you? Embarrassing way? You know? I heard you two talking out there on the boat. It has happened to me that way. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, put out into the deep water and let down the nets for a large catch of fish. Now, what did Simon do for a living? He's a fisherman. You think Simon would go, dude, are you kidding me? Did they teach you how to fish like in the seminary? Listen, I just love this. And by the way, you don't catch fish in the deeps, in the Sea of Galilee. You catch fish in the shallows. And you don't catch fish during the day, you catch them at night. This is complete counterintuitive instruction. Simon answered, Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything. In other words, let's translate that. I've been working all night. I appreciate the fact that you're using my boat and stuff, but I'd like to go home and get some sleep. Right? I mean, that's really what he's saying. But he then says, but because you say so, I will let down the nets. This is a huge step. I don't know why you're asking me to do this, but I trust you, and I'm going to do it because of that. See, that's how thinking begins to change. Peter's thinking was, you don't catch fish during the day, you don't catch fish in the deep. I know how to catch fish. The rabbi said, I want to change the way you think about this, and so I want you to cast your net out into the deep, and I want you to do it right now. And although Peter had these doubts, he said, okay, I'll do it. Now, what happens? It's a great story. When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break, so they signaled their partners in other boats to come and help them, and they came and filled both boats so full that they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, Go away from me, Lord. I am a sinful man. For he and all of his companions were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken, and so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. Then Jesus said to Peter, Don't be a goofball. What he said. Don't be afraid, Peter. From now on, you'll catch men. So they pulled their boats up on shore, left everything, and followed him. I love that. The obedience despite the doubt. And then there's this other part where, so what Peter is doing is he's learning a new way of thinking. My way of thinking has not served me well. I'm going to begin to metanoia about everything. And so in Matthew 16, there's this amazing thing that takes place. We've talked about it a lot, but we have to mention it again. And it's this renaming. And so these things have to be true in our life. We begin with a curious encounter, and then we actually begin to obey without understanding and without having all of our doubts cleared up. We go, okay, I'm going to try this. Matthew chapter 16, there's this beautiful passage, and it starts in verse 15. Who do you say that I am? Jesus asked. What about you, Peter? Who do you say that I am? Simon Peter answered, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. Jesus replied, blessed are you, Simon, son of John, for this was not revealed to you by men, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, Petros, and on this rock I will build my church. You are Petros. Earlier, Jesus said, you will be called Petros. Now, Jesus said, now you're going to be called Petros. I know who you think you are. You think that you're a Galilean fisherman, Simon, John, son of John, right? Simon Johnson. Is there a more kind of regular name than that for a Hebrew? Simon Johnson. That's who you think you are, Simon Johnson. But I want to tell you something, Peter. I want to breathe your real identity into you. You are Petros. You are, it's the Greek word that means rock. You are Rocky. I love that. This is the goal of the spiritual life, right here. This is it. Find out who you really are and live as if it's true. When I say that's all there is, I mean, it's the most amazing possible way to live. Henry David Thoreau said it this way, and we could look at, I have to say, and I have all week long, all the last 3 years, we could look at poetry, we could look at science, we could look at any kind of American, English, Middle Eastern literature, and the same thing would come up time and time and time again. This one thing. Henry David Thoreau said it like this: most men die with their songs still in them. What did he mean? They never become who they are and live that way. If you've been around here at all, you hear me refer to this passage in Revelation chapter 2 more than once, but in Revelation chapter 2, verse 17, it says this: he who has an ear to hear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To him who overcomes, I will give some of the hidden manna. I will also give him a white stone with a new name written on it, known only to him who receives it. What is that new name? It's your real name. See, Simon Johnson wasn't his real name. That was his given name. What was his real name? Peter. And when he lived out of that name, his life was beautiful. When he regressed back into Simon Johnson, he created pain for himself and everyone around him. So there's an actual renaming where you begin to get a clue of who you are, and then there's countless disappointments. Have you ever disappointed yourself? If you've not disappointed yourself, raise your hand, because I want to come over and have lunch. Because just raising your hand is very disappointing to me. So there you go. You know, in that passage, Matthew 16, where Jesus just says, blessed are you, Simon, son of John, because flesh and blood hasn't revealed this to you, but my Father which is in heaven. Just about 5 minutes later, Jesus says, now I'm going to go to Jerusalem, and I think things are going to get tough, and it wouldn't surprise me if I was killed. And Simon steps up and says, that's not happening. And what does Jesus say to him? Get down behind me, you accuser. Satan. What? How fast was that switch? Does that ever happen to you that fast? 1 minute, it's like, and the next minute, Listen to this in Matthew 17. Myriad of disappointments. Why do we have these? There's this place in time where Peter, James, and John, 3 of these disciples, go with Jesus up on this mountain, and Jesus is transfigured in front of them. He turns to like pure light. And then Moses and Elijah show up. It's like, wow! That's wow, right? I mean, what else can you say? So Peter, James, and John are up there, and Peter's, looking at this and witnessing this amazing spiritual experience, and what do you think he says? Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it's good for us to be here. If you wish, I'll put up 3 little houses, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. What? While he was still speaking, a bright cloud enveloped them, and a voice from the cloud said, This is my son whom I love. With him I'm well pleased. Please shut up, Peter. It says, listen to him. In other words, dude, relax. You don't have to build anybody a house. Mark 1. Let me just read you one more. And these aren't even the world-class ones. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went to a solitary place where he prayed. Simon, and anytime the writer calls him Simon, you know he's living in, out of his old ID. Simon and his companions went to look for him, and when they found him, they exclaimed, Everybody's looking for you! And what's the implication? What are you doing out here all alone so selfishly? We've got people that need us. Again, what Peter's doing is he's starting a business, right? Jesus Incorporated. And I have to say that I've done the very same thing in my version of Jesus Incorporated. I was trained to. This is how you do it. Do it like this, and then this, and then this, and here's the business plan, and this is what we're going to do. And what are you doing getting alone, Jesus? We need you back here. I mean, we've got things to do and people to see and popularity to increase. I mean, how many friends do you have, really, on your Facebook page? Now, again, that's a beautiful thing. Social media, it's wonderful. But what Peter's trying to do is promote, and it was an old way of thinking. Peter, like many of us, have settled into looking at spirituality as simply training our ego, our old self, to be a better version of itself. See, I've never realized that there were 2 versions of me. You've got Joe 1 and I've got Joe 2. And so do you. Peter 1, Simon, son of John, and then there's Peter. There's Abram in the First Testament, and then there's who? Abraham. What does God do to Abraham? Renames him. There is Jacob in the First Testament, and then what happens to him? He becomes Israel. God renames him. Why is all this renaming happening? What is it with God? Is he doesn't like the first name? That's not it at all. The idea is that there is a you that you've had to become. We call it an ego, call it a false self, call it a construction, call it a belief system of believing, a way of thinking. There is a you that you've had to become in order to survive. And no one's blaming you. But it is not the best you. It is not the distilled, beautiful you. Most people who are religious try to take that egoic me. Now, what's my ego? Let me just clue you in on what my ego is like. I am big, and I am powerful, and I can make things happen, and I like to win, and if you win, people like you, so winning is important, and it's all wrapped up in performance. That's my ego. So I can take that ego into my religion and have my spirituality try to make that as good as it can be. And you can dress that up, but you cannot you can put lipstick on a pig, right? But that's what you're doing. That's what most religious people do, is they take their egoic self, the only self they know. They take their Simon Johnson and they try to make it the best Simon Johnson that they can. That's what Peter's story is. That's called translative growth. It always has to do with the object. Now, I'm going to... Transformation is what I'm after. Transformation is when I view myself not as an object, but as the subject. What do I mean? Well, let me give you this little, can we do an exercise together? I want you to trust me for just a second. I'm not going to, I have you close your eyes. Just close your eyes for just a second. Let's get quiet for just a second. Well, it'll be more than a second, but a few minutes. And I want you to just concentrate on your breathing for a few minutes. And I want you to pay attention to the thoughts that cross your mind when we're doing this. So close your eyes. Let your mind focus on your breathing. And I want you to see what thoughts come up for you. Watch them kind of pass on the screen of your mind. And when you get caught up in them, just bring it back to your breathing for a second. All right, that's enough. Painless. Now, here's my question. If you were watching your thoughts, who is doing the thinking of the thoughts and who is doing the watching? My suggestion is that your thoughts are not you, but that you are the watcher, the seer. And that the one that was watching is the real you, and the one that was doing the thinking is the egoic you, the false you, the Simon, son of John you. And that no one has ever taught us about this, and we're afraid of it, really. But it's just what Jesus came to say. Well, wait a minute. Where does Jesus say that? Now, that's a good question, and fair. You see the passages I have listed there in green? Let me read them to you briefly. I've got them right here. I've got them here all typed up so I don't have to take the time to turn in my Bible. Mark chapter 8, verse 35. Whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. What's Jesus talking about? Well, there's a life you have to lose. That's the egoic life. And there's a life you have to save, the real you. If you think I have to do this myself, I have to save myself, that's complete ego. That's me depending on me to get the job done. And you will lose everything. That's the rich young ruler's story. I can't sell everything I have. That's all my security. That's all my control. That's all my... Matthew chapter 10, whoever finds their life will lose it, and whoever loses their life for my sake will find it. Matthew 16, for whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. Luke 9, whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it. And John chapter 12, anyone who loves their life will lose it. Lose what? Lose the Simon Johnson and find the Peter. The real you. And then John says this, and I love this way of saying it. John 8:48. Unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it's wasted. But if it falls to the ground and dies, it will produce a crop that is 100-fold. What's John saying? You've got to kill the beast. The beautiful thing is the beast isn't the real you. So, how does this happen in Peter's life? A million mistakes. And then there's good intentions and old self ways. He's trying to do the right thing, but he's still thinking in the old way. And I'm not going to get quite finished with this morning, but that's okay. We're like, there's no hurry, and we'll take up here next week, so don't worry. But let me just show you how this shows up for Peter. I want you to think about the very end of the story. Peter and Jesus and the others are up in the Garden of Gethsemane, and Jesus is just about to be arrested. In fact, the Roman legion shows up, and Judas gives Jesus the kiss of death. And John 18, verse 10, listen to this. In fact, by the way, back up, listen to this. These people say, Jesus says, who are you? Jesus, knowing all that was going to happen, to him went out and asked them, "Who is it that you want?" "Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. And what does Jesus say? This is so much fun. Your English translation says, "I am he." That is not what it says. It's two Greek words only, two Greek words. Echo ami. I am. Holy smokeroos. And one of the Gospels say, and the guards fell backwards. Why? Because Jesus knew who he was. I am. In fact, he says later in another one of the Gospels, when the Pharisees were getting after him, before Abraham was, I am. Now, I want to stretch your thinking just a second, and I need you to send me emails this week, and this will pro-tag, this will make that happen. You can say the very same thing. You can say the very same thing. And we'll talk about that next week, but before Abraham was, you were. You are. What do you find when you look deep and get rid of this false self? What do you find? You find God at the deepest part of your center. So, this is going on in the garden. They said, "Jesus of Nazareth, I told you I'm him. If you're looking for me, then let these men go." Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. That's great, isn't it? And Peter's like, nuts, missed him by that much. Jesus commanded Peter, "Put your sword away." And another gospel says, and then he picked up the ear and put it back on the servant's head. You'd think everybody would go, well, wait a minute. But see what Peter was doing? I mean, I'm trying to defend this guy, but he's doing it in an old way of thinking, right? And Jesus says, if you're going to live by the sword, Peter, you're going to die by the sword. You've got to metanoia. Change the way you think. This is going to be okay. You don't have to protect me. And then in John 8, a little later in the chapter, Peter's death blow is finally struck. Peter is struggling, and he gets it, and then he loses it, and then he gets it. And then in John chapter 18, in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus says, "Peter, you're going to deny me." Now, this strikes at the deepest heart of Peter's ego. And I used to say for any man, but for any human, what is one of the most highest, and for me, one of the most highest qualities is loyalty. Loyalty. And Jesus says, "Peter, before the night is over, you're going to deny you even know me." And Peter says, here's his old thinking. Everybody else, all these other 11 guys might deny you, because quite frankly, I wonder about all of them. Right? It's this or that. And that's what he's saying. Everybody else may deny you, but I won't. I am going to stand with you to the end, and if I have to die with you, see, poor Peter, he doesn't know himself. And I think Jesus is sad there, not because of what's going to happen to him, but because of the pain that Peter's going to need to feel. Here it is. As Simon Peter, warming himself, he was asked, "Aren't you one of his disciples?" He denied it, saying, "I am not." Wait a second. Verse 17. Peter had to wait outside at the door, and that they've arrested Jesus and taken him into the courtroom. The high priest came back, spoke to the girl on duty, and brought Peter in. "You're not one of this man's disciples, are you?" the girl at the door asked Peter. He replied, "I am not." One of the high priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off. That's a funny one, right? I think I know you. You cut my cousin's ear off about an hour ago. Challenged him, "Didn't I see you with him in the olive grove?" Again, Peter denied it, and at that moment, a rooster began to crow. And Peter went out and wept bitterly. Why? But you see, when Peter went out and wept bitterly, you need to understand that God started cheering. Finally, this makes me so happy. What? What makes you so happy? You're beginning to metanoia. You realize you're not who you thought you were. No, you're not loyal. Your old self, you're just full of ego. And so when Peter went out and wept bitterly, it was because he was just completely distraught and disappointed in himself. And that's finally John 21. Afterward, this is just fun. I love this. So Jesus and Peter and the disciples, Jesus is dead, and the story says he's resurrected, but Peter and the disciples are fishing again. And so they're having breakfast on the shore. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John," remember, here's the old name, "do you love me more than these men love me?" Peter says, "Yes, Lord," he said, "you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you truly love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Take care of my sheep." The third time he said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." True self is released. You may not be who you thought you were, Peter, but I'm so glad. And then the new self is released. Jesus says, "That's all I need. Just love me. That's all. Just love me and live that way." That's where we'll start this whole thing. That's all. See, what I know about myself is this, that for years and years, I don't know how many, a lot, what I tried to do is make the old me a better version of itself. Doesn't work. The old me, according to Jesus and Paul, we're not going to take the time, but look in Ephesians 4 and Colossians 3. The old me has to die. Paul said, I have been crucified with Christ. Nevertheless, I live. Old me crucified. New me beginning to live. Yet not I, old me, but Christ lives through me. I don't know how I missed this. The ego is constantly searching for any solid and superior identity. A spiritual self-image gives a status. See, that's it. What I want you to think about my old man is that it's spiritual and stable and secure. There's no better way to remain unconscious than to baptize and bless the forms of religion, even prayer itself, instead of surrendering to the new man himself. And that's when we begin to enter kindergarten. Now, how does this happen? How do I begin to kill the old man and begin to live in the new man? Well, I have to recognize the old man when I see him, and the only way I know how to do that is through meditation. You have to get quiet. You don't get quiet, you'll never see it. Now, what does our world want? Don't get quiet. What does my old man want? Don't get quiet, dude. Stay busy. And what do I hear when I am quiet? What I hear are to-do lists. What I hear when I'm being quiet in my backyard right now, I'm quiet, my eyes are closed, and it's just beautiful. And then all this voice goes, you could go pick up some of those figs that have fallen off the tree. People are going to step in them. Where does that come from? There's a force at work within me that does not want me to be quiet. It doesn't want to die. So, what I'm suggesting this morning, and will continue to suggest, is meditation, contemplation, centering prayer. It's the only way you're going to hear what has to die. The only way. I don't know any other way. And I'm standing on 5,000 years of spiritual experience. Jacob, in the book of Genesis, is traveling, and he is a rascal. He's a deceiver. He is not the kind of man you'd want to go into business with. And he falls asleep in the middle of nowhere, and he has this dream about angels from God descending and ascending a ladder, Jacob's ladder. You may have heard the story. And the next day when he wakes up, he says this, "Surely God was in this place, and I did not know it." And he named the place Beth-el, the house of God, and the gateway to heaven. What did it take? Stop traveling, sit down, and be quiet, and I'll show you what's really true. Now, you can religiously continue to try to put lipstick on your pig. It's not going to work. And you all know people who do that and it doesn't work and they think it's working. They think, aren't I a beautiful pig? Or you can kill the pig, eat the bacon, and allow the real you to begin to emerge and come out into the light of day. That's what Jesus came to say. And that's what it means to believe in your own life again. And that is what I'm going to show you how to do, at least as best I can, over the next several weeks. Who's in? So God help us with this. That's all. Help us. In Jesus' name, amen.
Love